All right, Adam Yohannan, welcome to the High Key Podcast.
Thank you, Jackson. Thank you for having me.
So, in today's episode, I kind of want to go through your journey from the big law firms transitioning into the more niche down small business law that you do now, building relationships and how you go about that with clients, kind of that human-centered approach to law, just to start.
The same way lots of people get into law, just by being a liberal arts major in college, and you're like, well, maybe I could be a lawyer. And I was always into business, and I wasn't good with numbers necessarily, so I was like, well, maybe I could be a business lawyer, since I probably won't be a great, finance hedge fund guru, but maybe I can be a business lawyer. So I went straight to law school after I graduated from Tulane undergrad. I went to Georgetown Law for 3 years and took pretty much only business law classes after the mandatory classes, and I got really deep into the cutting edge issues of today, which is basically intellectual property and these new styles of business models that we're seeing from the small businesses. So I got all that academic background, and I did what most kids from Georgetown Law do. They just go to the big law firms in New York City or Washington, D.C. or San Francisco, and they serve the biggest companies and the biggest banks. I was at two law firms, Wilkie Farr and Milbank, and in those jobs I served the biggest private equity firms, the biggest banks. I learned a ton, and I worked with the best lawyers on the planet, in my opinion, at least in my practice area. And I learned as much as I could in 3 years, but these work environments are grueling. I won't sugarcoat it. I don't think it's as bad as investment banking, but it's very bad. And I had lost control of my life, and I wasn't sleeping or exercising, and I was like, for what? Like, it's just a salary. I don't own this law firm. What am I really getting out of this? Am I going to be a partner? Like, are they going to help me get clients? And I had a few experiences that totally changed my perspective on big law, which is I had a friend who said, I can throw you a deal if you want to bring it into your firm. But it wasn't the biggest deal ever. This was a young guy, so I tried to bring it to the partners, and it just wasn't big enough for them, and it wasn't a good fit in terms of pricing and what I was bringing to the table. And that's what so many young lawyers deal with, is they do have at least a little bit of rainmaking capacity. Like, they could have a practice if they really put themselves out there, but not at the price levels of the big firms. And that's what ruins them, because there's people who are like, I know you, you're great, we want to work with you, but if you're at this huge firm, we have to pay those rates, and we simply won't do that. So after all that, I went on my own. I priced things the way I think they should be priced. I served the clients the way I like to serve them. And I picked the clients I want to work with. So it's not just the big banks anymore. It's small businesses that actually mean something to community and to culture. And it feels great every single day to do that and be excited about the progress we're making, as opposed to just being a cog in the machine of corporate America.
Yeah. What's the culture like at those places? Like, I know you were saying you're not sleeping and all of that. Is that what everyone's like there? Like, obsessed with the work and grinding all the time?
Pretty much. There's ups and downs. There's some practice areas, things are busy at a certain time. There's always downtime. But yeah, for the most part, it's crazy all the time. If you're not working all the time, you're on call all the time, which is strange because you look at other industries, other tough industries like tech and medicine. Let's not get it twisted. Like, those companies are on call 24/7, but that's the company. So there are shifts, and the doctors might be on call. They have their duties, of course, but it's not every single day. And, likewise with tech companies that require 24/7 service, there are shifts, and in law, it's just insane. So I was there during the shift to virtual, and I only had a short amount of time really in the office environment and getting that old school, stereotypical, crazy in-office scene. So I never really experienced that. But what I did experience was a shift to virtual that was accompanied by, in my opinion, much greater intrusions into people's personal lives, because it was basically understood that you were going to be available all the time, especially when there was literally a mandated lockdown. The excuses were nothing at that point. So yeah, people are very demanding. The clients are demanding, and they're demanding of the partners, and the partners are demanding of the senior associates, and the senior associates are demanding of the junior associates. And then you start to become the monster that by year 2 and 3,
you're demanding the interns.
Exactly. Like, I've had a few experiences towards the end there where I was like, wow, what have I become? I'm so stressed out right now over the speed at which we are delivering such a meaningless deliverable, and I have passed that stress on to other people. So
why do you say meaningless deliverable? What was it?
let's not get it twisted. Many deliverables we're working on are of the absolute utmost importance, and it's the highest stakes deals you could possibly be working on. But that doesn't mean that every little piece of it, every little document along the way, every little signature page necessarily needs to be done right away. Now, when something needs to be done right away, of course, we're doing it right away. And that applies even now as a small firm. But when something doesn't need to be done right away, we don't want to have fake fire drills constantly, where in the chain of this needs to be done, the fact of the urgency gets lost and people are being urgent for no reason, and we're manufacturing stress at a certain point. And yeah, it's that kind of a place, but there's good things. I think the best thing that everyone says really is the mentorship, and the lawyers who've made it there a long time, they are very good, and all the tactics I use today, and it all comes from these partners that they annoyed me so much, but I was paying very close attention, and I always respected them, and I wanted to be like them in certain ways. So you get the best of the best. It's crazy cutthroat, but once you shift your mindset to realizing that it's just a learning opportunity and you accept that you're one of the people who doesn't belong there long term, it gets much easier.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some of the biggest lessons you learned from those mentors or the people you were working with?
The biggest thing you learn that you don't expect when you go into law is when you're a deal lawyer, which is a transactional lawyer who doesn't go to court, who basically does contracts, and that's all that they do. That's the majority of lawyers in America. When you're that kind of lawyer, you are not a fighter in the boxing ring all of the time. And people who go to law school, they've seen a lot of television, they've seen the Law and Order and the Suits, and it's all litigation all the time. The litigation is so overrepresented in entertainment, and to me it's so boring and it's so tired out. Like, the real action is in deal making and in transactional work. So what I learned from those big law transactional partners was how to be not a fighter necessarily. Of course, if we need to, we will fight for our clients, but really we're consensus builders, and we are helping people navigate and solve complex problems, and we're holding their hand and we're guiding them. We're giving a holistic analysis that includes perhaps non-legal factors, and there's so much that goes into that that's so rich, other than just, this is the case, these are the facts, we're going to fight in front of the jury. The partners really understand how to focus on the client objective, which oftentimes is much larger than what the lawyers are working on. So you have to appreciate how small you are as a transactional lawyer most of the time. That doesn't mean that you're small in general, because there will be those moments when the transactional lawyer steps in and we have to close the deal and we have to do something miraculous for the client. But most of the time we're laying low and we're just keeping order and keeping everybody happy. So that aspect of law I learned from the big law partners, and many litigators who try to be transactional lawyers, they just don't get that. We have a word for that in law. We say they're not commercial. You don't want a reputation of being not commercial. Doesn't mean you're a pushover, but you don't want to be so aggressive and annoying that it ruins the business deal. And many lawyers get in trouble with their clients for being so annoying and aggressive that they literally just ruin the deal, and they get blamed, and that's how they get fired. And that's where we swoop in and we try to steal clients in those contexts.
Wow, that's crazy. So what's the most complex problem you worked on at a big law firm?
You know, the thing about the complexity of the work at the big law firms is what makes it complex. And it's different than what makes a small business deal complex. A big firm deal is complex because the companies you're working with are so large and they have so many moving parts that you have to deal with in the contract. And there's so many foreign countries and lawyers in foreign countries, and you have to keep track of everything. And the agreements themselves can be like 150 pages, 200 pages, and you really have to know that inside out. So I've been in and out of these books for years on end trying to master my original specialty, which was debt finance. And it's absolutely grueling, but these contracts are not like small business contracts because they govern every little aspect of a massive company. So when I do the deals for the small businesses, I have no problem using a 10 or 15 pager for the same type of deal that in the big firms you would have had to use 150 pages and endless other things going on in countries around the world. So nowadays the stuff I deal with in terms of project management and running process, it's easy because maybe there's one or two foreign countries at most, but it's not every day I'm going to be dealing with 10 different countries on 5 different continents like we used to deal with in the big law.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what do you think ChatGPT and AI will do to contracts? Like, because you said like 200 page. I feel like AI has to come into play somewhere in there and help with the process of it.
Oh yeah, it's coming in. And when I was there, especially as a junior associate, I really was doing so much ridiculous grunt work at various points. I was like, how is there not AI for this? So it's really far behind in transactional law. People are a bit surprised by that because in litigation, AI is actually really good right now. And it's actually impressive like how far ahead it is because they have to sift through thousands of docs too. But to analyze these contracts, that's really the fundamental task that a lot of AI is trying to do in law is get a new agreement, the other side sends it over, and the client wants a summary of that agreement right away. Basically called an issues list, and it needs to include our commentary and a perfect summary of the agreement. That's a perfect candidate for AI. Here's the big problem. How do you teach the AI what each different type of contract term means? Well, it has to see other agreements similar to this one, and then it has to get trained by lawyers who are like telling it over and over again, this is that, this is this type of agreement, that's this type of term. In order to do that, the law firms need to develop this intelligence to some extent internally. There are public contracts out there, and that's what a lot of companies rely on, but it's a limited data set, and so the output of the AI products that rely on that are limited. Within certain law firms, especially the top like West Coast startup law firms, they are using their unbelievable database of contracts and their staff of attorneys to train AI programs in-house using a data set that's really reliable and actually reflects, what's really happening in the market. So, yeah, all that is to say the junior associates will be getting laid off at higher rates in the coming years. No question about that.
Just because all their job can be done with AI?
Not
like
all
of it?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, yeah.
There's so much that goes into law other than paper pushing if you're doing it right. Now, a lot of these junior associates, their whole job is just reduced to mindless paper pushing. So, yeah, if that's all you're doing, then either they're going to have something else for you to do, or you'll be laid off. There is a lot else to do, but oftentimes people don't do it because they're so busy pushing paper and doing mindless work. So I don't think the layoffs will be as bad as people think, and I think the junior associate role at these big law firms, and the same could be said for the big banks, I think it'll become a bit more interesting. Like, they might actually they might actually be using their brain a little bit more rather than just waiting until you're high enough to have some other person below you doing the grunge work. Hopefully the youngsters right from the beginning will really get into it. And from what I hear, the West Coast startup law firms are already doing this a little bit, and they're doing a good job. So, that's what I'm trying to do as I build my firm. We don't have the same resources for technology, but the truth is that you don't need super high-tech technology to start automating things in legal practice. You just need the willingness to sort of program the AI that you're using. Like, just teach it what you like, basically. There's somewhat of an upfront human investment, if you want to put your own legal theories into the AI as opposed to just using the legal theories of the lawyer who created it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So take us through the transition period of going from like big law, right? You're in there, you're like, I'm not getting sleep, I'm stressed, I'm not servicing the clients the way I want to, and then you transition and start your own thing. Take us kind of through that journey and what that looked like, and like, was it a hard decision to leave and start your own thing? Was it scary? What were all the things and emotions going through your mind?
It was extremely scary. When I first went out on my own, I was living in an extremely expensive, New York City rental, and immediately I had to move out, move back in with my parents, cancel.
How much was the rental?
I don't want to say, but it was embarrassingly expensive. You hear a lot of horror stories these days in the New York City real estate market. Yeah, it was horrible. So, but it was fine because I had a good job, but went back to zero. So it's extremely frightening because when you're in the big law firm, your self-esteem can always fall back on, well, I represent this bank and that bank and I'm part of this firm and that's like what makes me like a legit lawyer. And now I'm like, oh my God, I have zero clients. Like, am I even a lawyer? So that first month, what did I do? I had zero clients. What I do all day, you study and you go back to school and you open the books again and you become a master of the craft that you want to pursue, which for me was a slight practice area shift. I'm still a transactional lawyer, but in the big law, I was like a debt finance specialist, and now I'm all small business. So I hit the books hard to learn a few new things, and I started doing social media, blogging, and just anything I could do to get my name out there and just waiting for the phone to ring. But I believed in my heart that I was meeting an unmet demand, that at the end of the day, this is an underserved market and I can't promise when I'm going to corner it because these things are unpredictable, but I know I will at some point. And what I would say to anyone getting started in this is the first few clients are the hardest ones. Once you have those, just focus on doing as good of a job for them as you possibly can, and then make sure they leave a Google review and repeat that process, and hopefully you don't run out of clients. And if you do run out of clients, then start paying for advertising and just wait for the referrals. But in order to get those referrals, you got to get those first few really solid clients underway so you can show to the world, I actually can do small business. I'm not just some big law guy who's only ever worked on billion-dollar leveraged buyouts. Like, I'm ready to handle the mom and pop LLC operating agreement and trademark filings, small business M&A, and all those kind of issues, which may seem like a totally different planet than the big law, but it's really all cut from the same string.
Mm-hmm. So what made you switch to wanting to service small business clients? And like, how long did it take you to learn? Learn more to get to the point where you could start your own business?
Mm-hmm. I know exactly the moment I knew I wanted to service small business clients. I was doing pro bono at the law firm, which means doing work for free, which is really supposed to be for poor people. And, I had a small business client because I was a business lawyer, and I was just like, you know what? I think they're making too much. Like, they really should just be paying me. I'm not sure, why don't I just have my own business? And I thought about it more and more, and I thought about the growing small business economy, and I started talking to people, and I realized there is an epidemic right now of people who are wise guys who are drafting their own contracts, not for like $100 deal between friends, for $1 million deals, $100,000 deals. And people are drafting their own contracts with that much money on the line, and there are very real consequences to that. So I became aware of some real-world examples of that phenomenon, and I was horrified. So I saw a problem that I could fix, and if we're being honest, like, it's just a lot more fun to work with small business owners. It's just a much more fun day because, you're servicing these big institutions. The employees you're dealing with, they don't care. They're just cogs in the machine just like you are. So you're really just counterparts, cogs of different machines kind of working together. So it's just kind of, to me it was soul crushing. But now I'm filled with so much vibrancy because every single day. I just love the clients I deal with, and I'm just so happy to see them succeed. And I was kind of happy to see the clients succeed in Big Love, but like not as happy as I am now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I feel like you're more dedicated. You're the one fully focused on them. So, what are some of the big examples of like the small business issues that you've seen, and that kind of got you started and like really excited about everything?
Yes. Let me give the biggest things that come up that are, to me, the most interesting. We are seeing an epidemic in the U.S. right now of great small businesses being run by people who are close to the end of their careers or sometimes the end of their lives. And they don't know what's going to happen to the small business because the kids don't want to take over. The employees don't want to take over. And they just don't, they don't even realize that they could be selling their business on the open market and actually making a ton of money either for them or for their estate. So I really try to reach those people, businesses that are at a late stage of the current management or the current founder's tenure. And I really want to represent those businesses in M&A transactions to the new owners. What I hate to see in those situations, and it happens all the time, is they just dissolve the business. And it's such a loss of value. It's a loss of often employee relationships, client relationships. And to really understand the lost value, even if it's an unprofitable business, think about what it would be like to enter that industry as a new person. And think about how much you would value it if you could just snap your fingers and it's like, oh, here's the first 5 employees and the first 50 clients. Now let me just get started from here. It's like a built-in infrastructure. It takes founders so long to build infrastructure, and it takes so much money too. And it's just a waste because, like, to use an analogy, imagine you were just building up buildings and then tearing them down to build up a new building that's not necessarily that much of an improvement. So like in real estate, we would never let that happen, but in the small business economy, we let it happen all the time. So yeah, I'm very active in small business M&A, small business succession planning. Another big area, this is booming right now, everybody's doing this, the 50-50 partnerships. Me and my friend, me and my cousin, oftentimes me and my partner. So it's a your partner's your partner kind of situation. So
yeah.
This is
the Alex Layla Ramosi type vibe.
Yeah, this happened. Everyone's doing it, and we need, as a lawyer, I think it's great, and that they definitely should be doing that. But we need to have some things in writing, to say the least, because there's a lot of governance problems with 50-50. Because imagine the company gets big, you have to start making key decisions. There's a deadlock. And there's no procedure for resolving the deadlock. Companies get ruined. So this is similar to my first example with the people retiring. It's another example of how good companies get ruined for no reason, and it sucks for society because the legal planning is not in order. So the 50-50 partnerships, you've got to get yourself an operating agreement, and there's 2 big types of provisions we need to see in that operating agreement. Number 1, tiebreaker provisions. Who's breaking the tie? There's lots of ways we can slice this. Maybe one partner breaks the tie for certain areas, and the other partner breaks the tie in other areas. Or just one partner breaks all the ties. Or you have a third party. Some people say, oh, let's just do mediation. That's great. But mediation is not going to lead to a decision. It's just supposed to help you resolve things. So I'm happy with mediation, but I like to go a step further and give someone the nuclear option. I find that promotes negotiation and consensus building. The second thing you need in the operating agreement, if you're doing a 50-50 partnership, is a buyout clause. So even if the tiebreaker stuff fails, or sometimes someone breaks a tie and now they hate each other even more, they just need to separate. So the buyout clause will allow for separation, and it will create a procedure where the price is set according to some sort of formula that's predetermined in the contract. Of course, the parties can always just agree to a buyout, but oftentimes they cannot agree on the valuation of the company and the terms of the buyout. So the prepackaged buyout, and there's ways to make it fair so that it's not like too high or too low of a price within reason. We can control that, but there's got to be some mechanism for a buyout in addition to the tiebreaker provisions. With those two double layers of protection, I'm fairly confident that we can make 50-50 partnerships work, but yes, that's been a huge practice area for us. And the third area, which is just good old-fashioned trademark filings, this is the gateway drug of small business legal services. The first thing people want is the trademark filing. I got the business, let me get it trademarked, or I don't even have the business yet. Trademark, right? When are you going to do it? What's the date? Like, someone down the street's gonna... people just love their names. And some names are awesome, but... So that's the first thing. It's really simple. It can get complex. All IP can get complex, but the third biggest category of things we deal with is trademark issues and just general IP management. Common types of IP, anything creative is copyright. Code is copyright. People hire people to create content for them. They hire people to build the website, build this, build that. All that is intellectual property, and we need to control the ownership of that intellectual property using contracts. If I just hire someone on the street as an independent contractor and I say, hey, please build my website and build my logo and basically do all my creative stuff, guess what? They own all that unless you sign a contract saying otherwise. So this breaks my heart, the lack of knowledge over owning intellectual property, because people talk about this all the time in the popular culture. Like, we got to secure the ownership, like, got to own the IP, got to own the royalties, got to own this, got to own that. Sometimes it starts with just get the contractors to sign it over, and then you can worry about ownership versus the bigger dogs. But some people, they can't even get ownership from their own designers and engineers. So that's a big problem we're looking to solve.
Wow, so you're saying any content or website is owned by the person who makes it and not by the person if a contract isn't in place?
That is exactly right, unless they're an employee. So if you have an employee who's actually an employee, then it's assumed anything they do on the job, the company owns. But now we are in this independent contractor gig economy world, right? Like all the people who are servicing the small businesses in a multitude of different ways, all of them are making creative contributions that constitute copyright intellectual property. And this wasn't a problem in the past because large companies just use employees. So there was no IP leakage in the old days when everyone was just an employee. But now that everyone's an independent contractor, the rules are different. So we need to have a shift, and there's actually more paperwork that needs to be done, at least to secure the IP, if you're a small business working on only contractors. And let's just be honest about something. Most small businesses have literally zero employees these days. Like the new ones, it's 100% 1099.
We have a good amount of 1099s.
There's a lot of 1099s. And just to be clear about this 1099 stuff, just because you have a contract that says you shall be a 1099, that does not make it a 1099 in the eyes of the employment law or the tax law or anything else. It's the actual facts of the relationship that determine if you're a 1099 or a W-2. So what does that mean? The classic test is the employer controlling the way you work? Do they make you show up to the 9 to 5? You have to be in the office. Here's the tools you use. Don't bring your own tools, that kind of thing. And, the person who just shows up, I got my own tools. I'm going to get this project done whenever I get it done. That's a classic contractor. It's a complex test. But some people, a lot of people, have workers, let's say, who are beyond a shadow of a doubt W-2 employees, and they are being treated as independent contractors. There's huge risk to doing this, especially in states like New York and California. These contractors can sue you at any time and be like, where's my benefits? Give me the benefits. The taxing people can sue you at any time and be like, where's my taxes? So there's huge risk to that.
Okay, break that down more.
So, okay.
Break down how they can do that, because this is really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so you hire somebody, right?
Yeah.
They're working for you basically full-time. They're basically coming into the office. You gave them pretty much all the tools they're using. They are under the definition of employee under the law. They are without a doubt an employee. So, being an employee comes with certain rights. Independent contractors, we have no rights, really, under the employment laws, because you're not an employee. So, what are these rights? You have to have health insurance in certain cases. You have to be paid a certain amount. You have to have certain working conditions that aren't necessarily applicable to independent contractors. Basically, you're owed stuff. So it's better to be an employee generally. Obviously, there's many concerns, but yeah, you're owed stuff. And that's why the small businesses don't want them to be employees, because they have no cash, or they don't want to give them what they are owed. And the employee / contractor might say, I'm fine with that. And then the company says, oh, well, they're fine with it, so what's the problem? The problem is, just because they said they're fine with it, they didn't forfeit any of their rights. So they can still sue you later and be like, haha, I know I said I was cool with not getting any benefits, but give me my benefits or I'm going to sue you. So in those situations, there's really nothing you can do. You kind of just have to give them some cash or something to settle the employment lawsuit. So yeah, in addition to getting sued by the actual worker, so let's say it's someone you trust and you say, okay, I know that won't happen. You can also just be sued directly by the government. So states like New York...
The government like audits your business or something?
Yeah. And this audit stuff, it's all about, well, who's the agency auditing and how much resources do they have? Well, in New York and California and other big states, the agencies who audit these sorts of employment relationships, they have a lot of resources, and they've been using it more and more, which makes total sense because there's more and more independent contractors. So, of course, they're becoming more interested in it. There's this prevailing notion that the government is going to sit by, and these are state governments for the most part, are going to sit by and just allow the independent contractor distinction to become meaningless. That is not what's going to happen. The opposite is going to happen. They're going to start cracking down more and more on this. So even if you don't hire a lawyer to tell you who's an independent contractor, you should at least ask the accountant. I find a lot of accountants could not care less, and they'll just lie to you, or they'll just be like, I don't care. Like let's just, and
why? Because it's a lot of work.
No, not at all. They're just doing it for your benefit because they would get paid more, but they're trying to help you out. They know these small businesses are broke and they can't comply with all the employment law regulations. So with the accountants, I think they're probably right that the chances of IRS audits over this stuff or state tax authority audits probably low, but I can't really speak to that. But the employment agency audits, oh yeah, those are on the rise, and people getting sued by their former workers who, their buddy and were cool and all that. America's probably the most litigious country on earth. Suing people is just part of the American culture like nowhere else. And there are so many employment lawyers who sue over this exact thing. They are searching for workers who were misclassified so they can inform them, hey, do you want to sue your former boss? And people are like, sure. So that's how that works.
So is there a way, if small businesses were doing this, and like they already let an employee go or whatever they're labeled as, to retract that and amend it? Or is it just like if they've already done it, then they're already screwed to get sued by that person if it applies?
Well, you would be liable for the period of time that you were failing to provide benefits. So you could start providing benefits, and then they can sue you for the period of time that you were not receiving it. Perhaps you could give them everything they were owed and square it up, but it's really more about the future. And I'm thinking more about what's done is done in the past for the most part. But as people think about their relationships with their workers, if they decide, okay, I can't let these people be W-2, we don't have the resources to do a formal payroll right now, what can you do? there are things we can do to move the needle closer to 1099 by changing the facts in real life. Now remember, I said earlier, whatever you write in the contract is meaningless. Some people write a million times, independent contractor, means nothing. In real life, you can do certain things to move the needle, because it's not a hard line test. A lot of things in law, it's like there's 7 factors and we weigh the factors, and it's a whole law school exercise. So we just want to hit as many of those factors in our favor as possible. So don't make people come in to the office. That's a good way. Let them work on whatever schedule they want to work on. Don't make them be subject to the same rules as people who are W-2 employees at your company or other similar companies. So some companies have a mix, and if the 1099 people are being treated the same as the W-2 people, well then the court might assume that they're all W-2. Even if you're all 1099 within your own company, compare yourself to your peers and your industry and think about what's standard practice. What does a W-2 employment relationship usually look like in my industry? And that's an important point, because you can't necessarily compare apples to oranges, because what does it really mean to control how the worker works? It's a totally different answer for every industry. So it's hard to give a totally specific test to really apply to every situation. But look around, look at the bigger companies who seem like they have an HR and a legal department who might be trying to enforce this internally. And if there's a big gap between how they do it and how you do it, that to me is the most practical test I think people can use to try to understand if they have a misclassification.
Yeah. Is there a guideline? Like you said, it's not really set in stone and it's different for every industry, but I just think this topic's really interesting in terms of the employees and that, because it's definitely happening to a lot of different businesses.
To find very specific guidelines, you would want to look at the case law in your jurisdiction covering cases in your industry. So if courts let's say I'm in New York, so if the New York courts have published decisions saying in this industry, in this particular case, in this example, we are ruling this worker is an employee. If you want to find cases like that are in your industry and in your jurisdiction, and see which way the courts have gone. So that's how you get the precise answer. So that requires a little bit of research. Mm-hmm. But the general test that pretty much all the courts are going to more or less follow is, do you control how the work is being done versus directing the results of the work? Let me give an example with a web designer. That's a super common one. You can say to your web designer, I want you to use this copy and these colors and this vibe. These are my influences. You could be quite demanding and specific with what you want. But once you give that assignment, it's like, okay, off you go on your own to do it. And you don't really know how the sausage gets made, so to speak. You're not watching over, well, which software tools is the web designer using? Are they using the ones provided by the company, or do they have their own that they use for all their clients? A great factor is, do they have other clients, or are you the only client? And how much time do they spend working with just you? If the answer to that is 25 hours a week and they don't have any other clients, that kind of sounds like an employee to me. But there's other relevant facts too. If a plumber, for example, is working on a really big project for a whole year, and that's the only client for a whole year, and that's literally 40 hours a week, they may still have their own plumbing company with its own trucks and their own pipes. And so I don't think that just because you hire a construction contractor or a plumber or something like that for a long-term project where only you hire them, I don't necessarily think that makes them W-2, but there's lots of different factors, so you kind of have to weigh the factors, and you never really get to certainty unless it's a really obvious case.
Gotcha. Going back to the 50-50 partners, I was interested to get your take on this. What are the common issues that you see with those type of partnerships that you're working with?
Well, the fundamental common issue that leads to all the other sub-issues that I'll get into is this idea that the status of our relationship today will always be the status of our relationship. So what can change about the relationship? Problem number one, the two founders are doing different amounts of work or different value of work. So you may start on day one not even knowing who's going to take which responsibilities. You don't even know what the responsibilities are. You're just getting into things. And, you know, as things go along, people pick up what they're good at. I'll handle this, you handle that. And over time, maybe one person just ends up with all the most important jobs. They're working way more, and the other person isn't really contributing as much. In those situations, that can be a problem because the person doing more work might say, I don't want to keep doing more work than you are unless you agree to let me own more of a company or more of the company. If they cannot agree on that new arrangement, the company could be at a stalemate and no decisions could get made. So that's number one problem, is the types of work that people do.
So wait, for the stalemate, how does that get resolved?
Well, oftentimes there are just certain things you can't do. You can't ever approve anything that would require a majority approval or a unanimous approval unless you had both. So what would require approval of both the members? Because let's keep in mind, for day-to-day tasks, both the members usually can just act, like keeping up the day-to-day of the company. They don't need unanimous approval to go buy a pad of paper at the Kinko's, but for material decisions, big decisions of the company, are we going to enter into this big contract? Are we going to sell these major assets? Are we going to enter into this big partnership? Those kinds of decisions, you need both people to be on board. So if they're not on the board, lots of things don't move forward. Eventually, what will happen is the company will run out of money and the operations will break down because the partner who does more will simply stop working out of resentment. So to answer the question, like what happens in a deadlock is nothing happens. You just can't move forward with certain things that need to move forward. So that doesn't necessarily tank the company, but in a longer term timeline, it does. And the real problem is that the main workhorse stops being the main workhorse. So there's nothing malicious about this. Normally, it's just how things fall into place. You don't know who will be the star player. And for many partnerships, they don't care. If it's like a husband and wife or something, who cares? So that doesn't matter all the time. I don't mean to suggest that anytime there's an unequal contribution that that's necessarily a problem, but a lot of times it is a problem because some people aren't as close as they say they are on the front end. So as the business lawyer, it's my job to be super skeptical and in some cases a tad bit cynical.
Double as a therapist almost, eh?
We don't like to cross into that realm because we're unqualified completely, but lawyers do to some extent cross into that. Not in a real way, but yeah, you know what I mean. We have to be basically a super cynical therapist. A real therapist would try to resolve the issues and make it work. Like, we can't do that. I don't know how to do that because I'm not trained in that. So all I can do is assume the worst and make sure that the contract keeps everyone protected.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you were about to dive deeper into the problems with the 50-50 partner relationships and I interrupted you. So do you have the other one still on the top of your mind?
So number two, and this one a lot of people don't think about. There needs to be more money injected into the business just for operations, and the 50-50 founders can't agree on who will put that equal amount of money in and how much of the company it will get them, if any. So let's say at the beginning, you both put in a little bit of cash to get it started. Almost all small business people will tell you it's never enough. It's always underestimated. So, so you inevitably get to that point where you need more cash. In a single member LLC, that's a no-brainer. You just put the cash in or nobody does. In a 50-50, oftentimes only one person has the cash. Oftentimes they both have the cash, but one person doesn't want to invest more capital in the business because that's a business decision that reasonable people can disagree on. How capitalized should the business be? How much cash should we invest in growing the business? Like, A reasonable person can say not a lot, and a reasonable person can say a ton. So that's a reasonable disagreement, how to fund the business and how fast to expand, because that generally requires you to adjust the ownership. If we each put up 1,000 at first, and then we decide we need more cash, and I put up all of it, and it's 5,000, it's still going to be 50-50? I don't think so. At least let me get to 60 or something. So oftentimes the founders cannot reach a negotiated adjustment at that stage, and the consequence of that is the business will be underfunded, and if the business is underfunded, it will fail and shut down.
Interesting. Have you ever dealt with more than 2 people partnerships?
It gets much easier after that. So
oh, really?
yeah.
Oh, because there's a deciding factor? Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you get 3 and it's still potential for deadlock. It'll be like one person has 50 and then the 30% and the 20% sort of could create a deadlock together. So in those situations, you want to look at the math and be like, is there any chance of a deadlock with more than 2 people? And if that's mathematically possible, you still want to have the tiebreaker provisions. Yeah, you probably still want to have the buy-sell provisions to some extent. It's structured a little differently. It'll probably be the company itself buying it, and it would probably only be in certain situations. But the biggest thing that changes as you get to 3 people, it becomes more of a formal organization. These 50-50 operating agreements, there's no formal structure for how it needs to work. We're doing custom things to make it work for individual companies. It's whatever they want. After 3, there should be a board of directors, maybe. There should be board meetings, maybe. A process for how certain decisions get made. Maybe there's committees. And it just looks more like a larger organization. It's not a full-on big company. It still can be like more family business and stuff. But the 2-member LLC is really a high level of informality and customizable ability. And just to clarify, this is all for LLCs. With corporations, there always needs to be formalities, just as a matter of law. But LLCs are an alternative business entity that was created only a few decades ago, and they differ from corporations because not only do they not pay taxes, corporations pay corporate tax, LLCs don't pay any taxes, but in addition to that, the corporate governance requirements are extremely flexible in an LLC. You can basically do whatever you want. Whereas in a corporation, it has to work a certain way. There has to be board meetings, people have to have certain rights, the dividends need to be paid a certain way. It's a old school company business law, and the LLC is the Wild West. So that is why the LLC is the preferred business entity for small business owners, because they need customizableness. In the big law, we had complex deals, but they were not customizable, if you know what I mean. Like, you could have 150 pages, but there's only so many different moves you can make. Certain chessboards, the pieces, they can only go a few places. In the small business LLC world, everything's like the queen. You can go wherever you want to go, and that's what makes it more exciting and more fun.
Yeah. So how is it navigating the Wild West of the LLC world? Are you just constantly having to learn new things because new things pop up?
Yes. It's a lot more creativity to different solutions. Random problems come up because people make ridiculous requests that they would never be allowed to make in a standardized corporate deal-making process with repeat players. So in the small business context, I have to draft contracts that represent concepts I've never heard anyone mention in my career before, because people just make up random shit that they want in the contracts, and I have to make it work. So it's a lot more freestyle drafting, whereas in big law, most associates just do a lot of copy pasting. The thought process is, let me find the right precedent deal that has the right language that I can copy paste into this new deal. And there almost always is a precedent, especially at the big firms, which have unbelievable databases. So I don't have that. Not only do I not have a database, even if I did have a database, it wouldn't include the random things that people have come up with because it's an issue of first impression, as we say in the law. So yeah, lots of issues of first impression. And whenever such an issue comes up in big law, people act like it's such a big deal. Like, oh, we've never dealt with this before. Like, this is so exciting. We get to be real lawyers coming up with solutions to random problems. That's what I do every day now. It might be in a 5-page contract, but it's definitely a random solution to a random problem. So that's what's so fun about it.
Well, what's the most random problem you've dealt with? Like a common person would understand.
I'll just say the theme of random problems we deal with. People have so many conflicts of interest in small business land that they just don't care about and don't want to even worry about. But in corporate America, it's not really allowed to happen usually, because there's procedures and policies in place. In big law, we rarely had people come to us saying, like, we have this conflict of interest and that conflict, let's just make it work. We have to explain to a lot of people, and even if there is going to be some level of conflict of interest, we have to make sure it's not crossing a line, and we need to make sure that the safeguards are in place. So I would encourage everyone to think about those kind of issues because they can be solved. It's not like conflict of interest is never allowed, but people usually think about it not at all, and it deserves a lot of thought, actually.
Yeah, for sure. What are your goals? Like, what are your aspirations for the business and where you want to go, or your mission with it all?
I want the firm to be much larger, and I want to have more lawyers working with me who are specialists in specific areas of law that I know are going to come up a lot. For example, immigration and wills and patents. These are areas that are not my specialty. And when I have clients who have needs in those areas, I have a robust referral network, so I'm always making sure they're taken care of, and we're going to bring in the right people no matter what. But I would love to have a real one-stop shop like the big law firms have for big companies. They have all the practice areas all under one roof. I really want to bring that to the small lawyer community. So I'm really looking for in-house counsel at companies who want to do work on the side, a little moonlighting. Yeah, join me, and eventually the moonlighting becomes so big you can leave and you can have your own practice. So yeah, I'm really interested in collaborating with specialists in all these complementary areas of law. And there are so many that I could not learn if I had all the time in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are some big adversity points that you had throughout your journey getting into your own business and building?
Credibility was probably the first one because I'm so young, and in law, some people have an unbelievable bias toward older lawyers. Yeah. There are so many older lawyers who are like, why don't you wait your turn? Do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that. Trying to question whether the market is really demanding what I'm providing. They're questioning the core hypothesis of my business. So to stay strong on that and to not forget about all the evidence that I've gathered and the reasons why I believe the things I believe about filling this need in the market. And what I learned in this process is the real winners, the older guys who really won and did great things as entrepreneurs, either as lawyers or in other industries, those people are always looking to lift up a young person who's going for it. And I don't even mean in terms of giving them a deal or giving favors. I just mean in terms of providing some moral support and just saying, obviously you're venturing onto a really tough journey and it's going to be rough, but I do believe you are filling a niche, and I do believe you have what it takes. So to anyone else who's trying to go out there, don't let the people who are stuck in corporate America longer than they want to be, don't let those people bring you down, because the real winners, they want to see the younger generation of entrepreneurs succeed. And there's a lot of people who have regrets in corporate America because they had awesome ideas and they had awesome potential, but they didn't have the guts. So it's not for the faint of heart. It's not going to be a cushy corporate job, with good health insurance and all the things you come to expect and cookie time. But for me, it's been the greatest decision I ever made in my whole life. I would not trade this back for any W-2 job. I'm 1099 K1 for life at this point until I go down. So it's an addiction once you start working for yourself, and I encourage more people to make that jump if they have the expertise and the resources to do so. And if they don't have the expertise and resources to do so, I encourage them to be patient and to focus on saving and learning, because it always takes more money and more time than you think. I wish I learned that lesson much earlier. So the money in the bank when you start, or at least a credit line, or you're going to need the cash is the bottom line. You have no idea the expenses lurking below the rocks.
Yeah, you have no idea how expensive that New York place is.
Yeah.
All right, well, we can start to wrap up here. Do you have any advice for business owners and entrepreneurs? Like, you've probably worked with a decent amount of them. What are some common mistakes you see that people can avoid in this space?
I think people, they don't believe in their niche enough. Don't question your niche if you're not getting as much action as you think at first. If you've done your research and you believe that your target clientele is the right clientele, do not risk your credibility by venturing too broad into things where you don't feel as confident, just to be more broad, just to cover more potential clients. Stick with what you're good at and master your craft more than you hustle. Obviously, we have to hustle new business. We have to do the marketing thing, of course. No hustle, no nothing. But don't forget about mastering your craft. Don't stop hitting the books, and don't stop working to really be the best at what you do. Sometimes people forget about that because they're so caught up in the rainmaking and the admin of it. But you're in professional services, or even if you're providing a product, don't skimp on quality. That's what's going to carry you through the long term, even though the short term dividends might be lacking or not so apparent.
Mm-hmm. So diving into niche a little more, do you see that as a common problem with small businesses and just entrepreneurs in general? I see it happens all the time. But like, how do you know how broad or how narrow to go?
And where you are in breadth on day one is not necessarily where you will be several years down the road. You have your specific area of expertise. Focus on that and focus on leveling up in that. Once you get to a high level in your area, you will get to be a high level at related practice areas too. So some people think the way you become an expert in multiple areas of expertise is you start with all of them and you build them up in parallel. That's not true. You do one of them up, and as you're building that one up, all the ones around it that are somewhat related, you'll pick up on those one by one. And we're seeing that in our own firm right now, where we're like, what's the next little sort of related practice area that the clients are pushing us to get into? And when you do expand your expertise like that, let the clients drive that. Expand to things that you're being asked to expand to. Sometimes people are like, I'm going to learn this new thing. Nobody asked you to learn that new thing. So listen to what your clients are asking you to do, and every time they ask you for a certain service that you can't provide, think, all right, like, could I learn this? And sometimes it's like, no, I'm not going to become a divorce lawyer or an immigration lawyer. It's not going to happen. But there are certain other related
ties with the partnership.
Yeah, like that's too much. But there's related areas to mine that I can pick up because there's enough of an overlap and the clients are asking for it.
Yeah, like you're not going to become a certified therapist,
Exactly. That's never going to happen. So they need to have their own therapist and their own divorce lawyer, and those two people should be working together every step of the way.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a tip on like when to know to take that next opportunity if a client wants that, in terms of should I jump on that and start doing it or should I not?
If you can do it well. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if I can do it well. Take that risk with a client who really loves you, who's going to love you anyway. Or just be honest. Be like, look, this is my first time doing this. Do you consent to that? And just be like transparent. There's nothing wrong with doing something for the first time. But in law, and I think with all industries, you don't want to sell yourself improperly. So if you're really an expert at one thing and only a little bit of an expert at another thing, just be honest about that. Be honest about your experience. And people will respect that and respond well to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, last question here. What do you think makes you the most happy, or what do you define as success?
You have to be producing results that you actually think are good for the world. So if you look at your clients and you look at the deals that you're helping them accomplish, and you have no idea how that fits into your value system or why you were placed on this earth and your deeper meaning, that's going to be a problem. For a lot of people, they don't care. They say, work is just work. I don't like work. I just do my time. I get my cash. And that's cool. Like, I used to be like that too. Like, I used to work at the Nike store selling shoes for $10 an hour. That was just an honest day's work. But what I'm doing now is happiness on a different level, because the way I'm living my life is more aligned with my value system. Whereas when you're the cognitive dissonance of living this big law life that you don't care about, emotionally it creates a lot of problems. You know, that's why a lot of substance abuse and a lot of people who need therapy who work in big law, in my opinion, there's a spiritual misalignment. Aside from the fact that they're not taking care of themselves in more basic ways like sleep and diet. But beyond that, there's a spiritual misalignment as well.
Yeah, that was a great answer. I think that's a good wrap to the episode.
All right, Jackson, this was awesome. Thank you for listening to my rants.
Of course,
I got to run
a bunch of bombs. I got a lot of interesting takes from that. Just around small business. I mean, hell, we run a small business, so
I love it.
That was awesome.
I love it.